The silence is where most believers begin to panic because modern spirituality has trained people to depend on constant stimulation in order to feel spiritually secure. Many believers have unknowingly built their faith around emotional confirmation instead of covenant trust. They feel powerful when prayers are immediately answered, when worship feels intense, when revelation flows easily, and when external signs appear quickly. But the moment heaven becomes quiet, insecurity rises to the surface. Questions begin multiplying inside the mind. Did Yahweh leave me? Did I fail? Why does prayer suddenly feel empty? Why does the fire feel distant? Yet the deeper reality is that silence is often not abandonment at all. Silence is frequently the hidden classroom where Yahweh measures whether your faithfulness depends on emotional reward or genuine covenant loyalty. The modern world has conditioned humanity to fear stillness because silence exposes what noise has been hiding. The constant rhythm of notifications, entertainment, endless opinions, and digital distraction has created believers who struggle to sit quietly before Yahweh without needing immediate emotional stimulation. Many people have become spiritually dependent on excitement instead of rooted in endurance. But mature faith is not built through perpetual emotional highs. Mature faith is forged in seasons where external reassurance disappears and obedience must continue anyway. This is why wilderness seasons are so uncomfortable. The wilderness strips away emotional dependency and exposes whether the heart truly trusts Yahweh beyond visible evidence. Throughout Scripture, Yahweh repeatedly used silence and isolation as instruments of transformation. Yosef endured years of hidden imprisonment before stepping into authority. Moshe spent decades in the wilderness before leading a nation. Eliyahu encountered Yahweh not through the earthquake or fire, but through the still small voice. Even Yeshua himself entered isolated wilderness before public ministry emerged. Heaven's pattern has never been instant visibility. Yahweh often removes noise before releasing clarity because constant stimulation can prevent deep spiritual formation. What feels like divine distance is often divine restructuring taking place underneath the surface of your emotions. One of the greatest dangers during silent seasons is the temptation to manufacture spiritual movement because stillness feels unbearable to the flesh. Many believers begin chasing artificial confirmation when Yahweh becomes quiet. They run from conference to conference, from prophecy to prophecy, from emotional experience to emotional experience, trying to force reassurance back into their lives. But external noise cannot replace internal consecration. Sometimes Yahweh intentionally removes visible signs because he is teaching the believer how to remain faithful without needing constant affirmation. The wilderness reveals whether we love the Father himself or merely the emotional experiences surrounding him. Silence also reveals hidden idols that activity previously concealed. When life becomes quiet, unresolved fears surface. Anxiety becomes louder. Hidden insecurity becomes visible. Old wounds rise into awareness. The believer begins realizing how much of their spiritual confidence depended upon outcomes instead of intimacy. This exposure feels painful, but it is deeply necessary because Yahweh does not merely desire outward obedience. He desires purified motives, mature trust, and unwavering loyalty that remains stable even when feelings fluctuate. The quiet seasons expose whether our faith was built on emotional momentum or on eternal truth. Many believers incorrectly assume that spiritual maturity means constantly feeling spiritually powerful. In reality, some of the most mature believers walk through prolonged periods where they feel nothing emotionally dramatic at all. Their strength comes not from emotional intensity, but from disciplined faithfulness. They continue praying when prayer feels dry. They continue worshiping when emotions feel distant. They continue obeying when clarity has not yet arrived. This kind of consistency terrifies the kingdom of darkness because it demonstrates covenant faith rather than emotional dependency. A believer who only serves Yahweh during emotionally rewarding seasons remains spiritually fragile. But the believer who remains loyal during silence develops unshakable endurance. The silence tests whether we truly trust Yahweh's character beyond immediate understanding. The flesh constantly demands explanations. Human nature wants timelines, guarantees, visible movement, and immediate closure. But the kingdom often operates through hidden processes that cannot be measured naturally. Seeds develop underground before harvest becomes visible. Roots deepen invisibly before fruit appears publicly. Likewise, spiritual construction often occurs silently beneath the surface long before visible manifestation emerges. The believer who panics during silence frequently interrupts processes that Yahweh is carefully developing in hidden places. Modern culture has also produced an addiction to immediacy that directly conflicts with kingdom endurance. Society rewards speed, instant results, constant output, and visible productivity. But Yahweh frequently works through slowness because slowness exposes the true condition of the heart. Delay reveals motives. Waiting exposes dependency. Silence tests loyalty. Hidden seasons dismantle ego. Many believers love the idea of authority but resist the process that creates it. Yet genuine spiritual authority is not produced through visibility alone. It is forged through hidden consecration, where obedience continues without applause, validation, or immediate reward. This is why silence often becomes the dividing line between performative spirituality and authentic intimacy. Performative faith needs constant visibility to survive. It depends on recognition, excitement, emotional stimulation, and outward demonstrations. But authentic intimacy grows deeper in hidden places because it is anchored in relationship rather than performance. When Yahweh becomes quiet, shallow faith often collapses because it was sustained by emotion rather than rootedness. But mature faith becomes stronger because silence drives the believer deeper into surrender. Many believers also misunderstand the purpose of unanswered questions. They assume that uncertainty automatically means spiritual failure. Yet Yahweh sometimes withholds explanations intentionally because explanations can become substitutes for trust. If every step were fully explained, faith would no longer require surrender. The kingdom calls believers into dependence, not total intellectual control. The wilderness forces the soul to confront its obsession with certainty and replace it with trust in Yahweh's unchanging nature. This transition feels deeply uncomfortable because human nature craves control. But spiritual maturity emerges when obedience continues even while answers remain incomplete. Another hidden danger during silent seasons is comparison. When believers feel spiritually dry, they often begin comparing themselves to others who appear more emotionally alive, more visibly blessed, or more spiritually active. Social media intensifies this problem because people broadcast spiritual victories while concealing private struggles. This creates the illusion that everyone else is constantly hearing from Yahweh while you alone remain in silence. But comparison distorts discernment because every believer's process differs. Some are in planting seasons, others are in pruning seasons, others are in harvest seasons. Silence does not indicate rejection. Often it indicates preparation for greater responsibility. The wilderness also dismantles unhealthy dependency upon public validation. Many believers unconsciously build their identity around being seen as spiritually strong by others. They feel secure when others affirm their gifting, acknowledge their wisdom, or admire their discipline. But Yahweh sometimes removes visible affirmation to purify the heart from dependence upon human approval. Hidden seasons teach believers how to remain secure in covenant identity, even when nobody notices their obedience. This kind of purification produces stability because the believer no longer requires constant recognition to remain faithful. During silent seasons, daily faithfulness becomes extraordinarily important. Many people think breakthrough only happens through dramatic spiritual moments, but Scripture repeatedly shows Yahweh honoring consistency in ordinary obedience. Continuing prayer, maintaining integrity, serving quietly, guarding holiness, stewarding responsibilities, and remaining disciplined during unseen seasons builds spiritual muscle that emotional excitement alone cannot produce. Hidden faithfulness prepares believers to carry future responsibility without collapsing under pressure. Silence also teaches believers how to rest without complete understanding. This is one of the hardest lessons for the modern mind, because people often equate peace with certainty. But kingdom peace does not come from knowing every detail of the future. It comes from trusting the character of Yahweh despite uncertainty. The believer who learns how to rest during unanswered seasons develops a stability that circumstances cannot easily shake. Fear loses authority because trust becomes deeper than visible evidence. Many believers desperately pray for greater spiritual authority while resisting the processes that create it. Yet authority flows from surrendered endurance. Yahweh entrusts deeper responsibility to those who remain faithful in hidden places. Those who survive silence without abandoning covenant loyalty emerge with deeper discernment, greater humility, stronger character, and clearer spiritual vision. They become less dependent upon emotional fluctuation and more anchored in eternal truth. The wilderness is also where false identities begin collapsing. Without public affirmation, titles, recognition, or emotional stimulation, believers are forced to confront who they truly are before Yahweh alone. This exposure feels uncomfortable because performance can no longer hide insecurity. But this dismantling is necessary because Yahweh cannot fully build authentic identity upon false foundations. Silence strips away illusion, so covenant identity can emerge clearly. One of the greatest revelations believers eventually discover is that Yahweh was never absent during the silence at all. He was working invisibly beneath the surface the entire time. The wilderness was not punishment, it was preparation. The stillness was not rejection, it was refinement. The silence was not abandonment, it was invitation into deeper trust. What initially felt like spiritual distance becomes recognized as sacred construction once the season matures. Believers must also understand that emotional dryness does not equal spiritual failure. Feelings fluctuate constantly because human emotions are unstable by nature. Covenant truth remains stable regardless of emotional intensity. Mature believers learn how to anchor themselves in truth even when emotions feel inconsistent. They stop interpreting temporary feelings as permanent spiritual realities. This prevents panic during difficult seasons because faith becomes rooted in Yahweh's character rather than emotional atmosphere. The tested believer eventually develops a peace that no longer depends upon constant signs, immediate breakthroughs, or emotional confirmation. Their roots become deep because they have learned how to remain faithful in hidden places. Their trust matures because it survived silence. Their endurance strengthens because it was forged through waiting. Their discernment sharpens because noise no longer controls them. And their intimacy deepens because they learned how to seek Yahweh Himself rather than merely seeking spiritual experiences. The modern world teaches people to escape silence at all costs, but the kingdom teaches believers how to become transformed within it. The wilderness is not where faith dies, It is where shallow faith dies so mature faith can emerge. Yahweh often removes visible reassurance because he is developing believers who can walk by covenant instead of constant emotional confirmation. Those who remain faithful during silence become spiritually dangerous because their trust no longer depends upon circumstances. If you are currently walking through a quiet season, do not interpret the silence as abandonment. Continue obeying the last instruction Yahweh gave you. Continue praying even when prayer feels dry. Continue worshiping without needing emotional intensity. Continue walking in holiness without requiring applause. Continue trusting even while answers remain incomplete. The silence may feel uncomfortable, but hidden roots are growing underneath the surface. Yahweh is not absent from the wilderness. He is constructing endurance inside you that cannot be built any other way. The believer who learns how to remain faithful in silence eventually discovers that the wilderness was not empty at all. It was holy ground where trust became stronger than sight.